Chinatowns are located all around the world, from the Americas to Europe as well as Africa, Australia, and Asia. These areas are historically known as any ethnic enclave of expatriate Chinese, Macanese, Taiwanese and Hongkongese. But how did this happen? As the most populous country in the world, it is of little surprise that China has one of the largest diasporas on the planet. It is estimated that there are 50 million Chinese people living overseas, with 100 million of Chinese descent. In Asia, Singapore is the most important destination for the Chinese migrants, and it is also the most developed economic center for this community, with a current overseas Chinese population of 2.8 million living there. Other relevant examples of Chinese diaspora communities formed in Asia are Malaysia and Thailand. For instance, in Malaysia, the Chinatowns are principally based in the city of Selangor with over 5.4 million Chinese living there, whereas in Thailand, Bangkok has the biggest Chinatown with over 7.2 million Chinese citizens based there. Long before the arrival of Raffles in 1819, a small immigrant Chinese population had already settled in Singapore, cultivating gambir and pepper. When Singapore's free port was established, more Chinese and other immigrants flocked to its shores. For easy administration, Raffles grouped various immigrant communities into ethnic quarters. In his 4 November 1822 letter to the town committee, the area from the Boat Quay southwest bank of the Singapore River was designated a Chinese kampung. This self-contained kampung or community settlement became the home of many Chinese immigrants and a transit point for unskilled laborers going to Malaya. By 1824, there were 3,317 settlers, almost one-third of the total population at that time, eventually becoming Chinatown until today. Waves of Chinese emigration have happened throughout history. The misemigration, which occurred from the 19th century to 1949, was mainly caused by corruption, starvation, and war in mainland China and economic opportunities abroad, such as the California Gold Rush in 1848. Most emigrants were illiterate peasants and manual laborers, who emigrated to work in places such as the Americas, Australia, South Africa, Southeast Asia and New Zealand. When economic woes in the United States around 1870s spawned another spike in anti-Asian racism and scapegoating. In 1882, Congress overwhelmingly passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese immigration for 20 years. President Chester A. Arthur vetoed it, but then signed another version with a 10-year ban. The first law placing a restriction on immigration to the United States. It was extended for more than 60 years before it was repealed in 1943. Through the two opium wars in the mid-19th century, Britain and France forced the Qing government to authorize a massive exodus of Chinese laborers to Western countries and their colonies, to replace black slaves. This was the beginning of the dispersion of the Chinese across the world from Southeast Asia to America. After the First World War, and before the Second World War broke out in the Pacific, the economic prosperity of Southeast Asia further stimulated the demand for labor that was met by Chinese immigrants. By the early 1940s, there were around 8.5 million Chinese expatriates worldwide, over 90% of them in Southeast Asia. From 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded, to the late 1970s, large-scale migration was no longer permitted. The tide of overseas Chinese immigration, that continued for more than 300 years, was interrupted. A third wave of new Chinese migrants started in the 1980s, and was an integral part of the surge of global migration. The majority of migrants came from mainland China, but also from Taiwan and Hong Kong. They moved mainly to industrialized countries, and the top destination for overseas Chinese at the time was the United States. China's rapid economic growth and the development of foreign trade relations in recent years have seen a large number of Chinese move to developing countries. The population of Chinese migrants has soared in Central and Western Asia, Africa and Latin America. The overseas Chinese made significant contributions to their new societies. Whether in the tropical countries of Southeast Asia, or in the temperate nations of Europe and America, They pioneered the construction of roads and reclaimed wasteland in Southeast Asia in the 18th century. They built ports and cities and mined gold in the U.S. Constructed railroads, opened restaurants and grocery stores in Europe in the 20th century. With a tradition of hard work and frugality, Chinese migrants tend to earn their place in society by saving their income and investing in property to tide them through economic hardship. So, when a crisis hits, they are invariably able to take care of themselves before seeking help from family and friends, let alone the new society in which they live. The overseas Chinese continue to have strong ties to their home country. They believe that China is their homeland, an attachment that often lasts for generations. One of the main reasons they migrate is to be able to support their families and friends. They have a culture of making remittances to help those at home financially. For nearly a century, the Chinese diaspora has also participated in China's modernization. Since the 1980s, over two-thirds of the foreign investment accepted by the Chinese government has come from expatriates. In the face of a hostile public and in response to hard times and legal exclusion, Chinese immigrants began to build self-reliant communities that became known as Chinatowns. With the completion of the railroads and the end of the gold rush, Chinese immigrants moved in increasing numbers to urban areas. There, they began to congregate in Chinese-only neighborhoods that functioned as separate, nearly independent cities within the city. A Chinatown served as a safe haven and second home for Chinese immigrants. A place to shop for familiar food, to worship in a traditional temple, or to catch up on the news from the old country. It also was a good place to do business. The shops and factories in a Chinatown were almost exclusively Chinese-owned and would hire Chinese workers when many non-Chinese businesses would not. The overseas Chinese have a reputation of being hardworking and thrifty. Another distinctive trait of the diaspora worldwide is the importance they place on educating the next generation. All work is inferior, only reading is superior, is an old Chinese belief. Whether they are rich or poor, Chinese families abroad are willing to make sacrifices to ensure that their children get the best education possible. These characteristics have sometimes fueled stereotypical perceptions of Chinese immigrant communities, that have further widened the chasm between them and other social groups in their destination countries. However, it is difficult to make generalizations about such a large group of migrants. In a globalized world where cultures are constantly in communication, any attempt to label certain groups of people as short-sighted and irrational. Overseas Chinese have continued to explore and build their identities in this increasingly integrated world. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, where discrimination against people of East Asian descent has erupted, these challenges cannot be resolved overnight.
What is happening now, what is happening to us, as an adult, it's really hard to comprehend, like the hate. There's so much hate. How many chapters have you read?
Don't know.
After I have my daughter, I feel like it's important, especially as a woman, as an Asian, need to stand up, be strong, and also speak out, and let others know that we are not like weak.
An Asian piece of shit.
People can't stand you being here.
Asian American leaders say these attacks are a trend.
Brutally shoved to the ground in Oakland, California's Chinatown.
He never wake up again. I never see him again.
A string of deadly shootings at massage parlors in the Atlanta area.
21-year-old charged with killing 8 people, 6 of them Asian women.
We're here because we all know that our community deserves better. We are here standing together because we are sad, we are angry, and we are exhausted.
The Chinese abroad have developed a resilience to such stereotypes over the centuries, which could be useful while confronting these hardships.